Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Matthew Flanigan for the Wargamer.com, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the 5th addition to the Scourge of War Gettysburg series, Brandy Station. Brandy Station is the newest expansion pack for the Scourge of War series, and as I said, marks the 5th addition to the series if you include the original release, Gettysburg. Now, this video isn't really going to be a review, it's more along the lines of an AAR. I'm playing out one of the scenarios, actually Brandy Station 6, where you take on the role of General Stuart, and you command a Confederate cavalry division later in the day during the Battle of Brandy Station. Now, as I said, this isn't a review, it's an AAR. I did want to get it out of the way real quick that I do work alongside with the Norbsoft development team. I helped test Brandy Station. You'll actually see my name in the credits for it. So just obviously there I want to get that out of the way. It's easy to see there's some kind of conflict of interest, so my purpose in this is not to tell you what a great game it is and to go out and buy it, even though that's obviously what I think, but more along the lines of just kind of show you some of the additional improvements and scenarios and whatnot that come with Brandy Station, and I'll let you be the judge on whether that's something that you find interesting or not. But like I said, this is an AAR, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the history behind the scenario, as well as, like I said, what you can see on the screen and some of the additional features. So with that out of the way, yes, I was involved in the Brandy Station release. Let's get into the battle. Now, this battle focuses on the engagement which took place near the St. James Church. A little bit later in the day, the initial Union attacks at Brandy Station began around 4:30 in the morning. This battle is taking place around 11 o'clock. In this scenario, you command General Hampton and General Jones's brigades of cavalry under General Stuart. You actually play the role of General Stuart in the scenario, so General Stuart is on the field, but the units that you command in it are Jones's cavalry and Hampton's cavalry brigades, as well as some batteries of artillery which were stationed near the St. James Church. Brandy Station was a very interesting battle during the Civil War because in many ways it was a very different battle than the battles that had come before it. It was the largest cavalry battle of the entire war, with roughly 17,000 horsemen taking place in the engagement. There were also about 3,000 infantrymen who also participated. It also was the first battle of the Gettysburg campaign. Brandy Station took place on June 9th, which was actually the day that the Confederate Army was going to begin marching north from Culpeper into the Shenandoah Valley and then into the Union to launch General Lee's second invasion of the North. General Stuart's division of cavalry was screening the Confederate Army, which had 2 corps just down the road from Brandy Station, so it's an important battle in the sense that Stuart has to keep the Union forces from breaking through his lines. If he fails, the Union will become aware that the Confederate Army is ready to move, being positioned for a eventual attack on the Union states. Now, it also marked a turning point in the relationship of cavalry during the war. Everything prior to Brandy Station had demonstrated pretty much that the Confederacy had a pretty sizable advantage in terms of cavalry and the quality of horsemen in the South. The Union, for the first time at Brandy Station, really surprised General Stuart and fought very well against the Confederates, and while they did not hold the field, they definitely turned some heads with their performance, and from here on out you would begin seeing the Union Cavalry Corps gaining confidence, gaining experience, and gaining competency as the war would go on. Just a month later you would see similarly impressive performances from the Union Cavalry at the Battle of Gettysburg. And in fact, General Buford, who played such a pivotal role on the first day of Gettysburg, commanded one of the wings of the Union attack at Brandy Station. Brandy Station also marked the last engagement of the Army of the Potomac, in which General Hooker was in overall command. Hooker had actually ordered the Union cavalry to attack the Confederates at Brandy Station because he was worried that the concentration of Confederate cavalry did not mean that the Confederates are going to invade the North, but rather that the Confederates were going to launch a raid on his supply lines. So he wanted the Union cavalry to break up the raid before it occurred. General Stuart's forces were surprised and initially driven back, although they would hold their position and hold the field by the end of the day, preventing Hooker from finding out the Union intention. Shortly after the battle, General Hooker would be relieved of his command and replaced with General Meade, followed by the chase of the Union armies north as they tried to catch up to the Confederates who were invading. Just a last tidbit about the Battle of Brandy Station before I get into more talking about my deployments. As you can see, so far in this scenario, very little is occurring. My troops are kind of spread out in their positions, but I'm really waiting for the Union to make their move, so I'm just taking advantage of that to kind of talk about the battle a little bit. But as I said, the last little tidbit of information here is that Brandy Station was one of the few examples of a cavalry engagement during the battle, or during the Civil War, where horsemen charged with sabers and had full-on cavalry charges. This would happen to a certain extent at Gettysburg, but this was the largest cavalry engagement of the war, and one of, as I said, is one of the very rare times where cavalry engaged almost in a more European style, with full-on cavalry charges across open fields and up hills, and attempting sort of that old Napoleonic sense of the use of cavalry. Most of the war, cavalry would be used more for screening duties. They would fight, obviously, but often they'd fight dismounted. Rarely would they charge into the lines of the enemy troopers. Rarely would cavalry fight head-on-head with cavalry. The first day of Gettysburg is a good example of kind of the typical use of cavalry, where General Buford's division fought largely dismounted versus the Confederate lead elements heading into Gettysburg, and almost fought more like mobile infantry than they did cavalry. But Brandy Station is one of those rare examples where horse units would charge head-on at each other with sabers drawn, pistols drawn, and fight it out sort of in the old, like I said, the old sort of Napoleonic sense. So in that sense, it's very different from the traditional fighting that would occur throughout the rest of the Civil War. Alright, since we've got a moment or two more before the actual fighting begins and kind of more the discussion about the battle begins, I'll just go over real quick some of the new features in Brandy Station. First of all, the scenario pack, or the expansion, or the battle pack, however you want to describe that, includes 10 single-player scenarios. This is the 6th, as I said. It also includes 5 multiplayer scenarios and a brand new 5x5 mile map. In addition to that, there's a new order of battle for the battle, so you can use that for sandbox battles if you want to create your own, or if you want to, have sandbox battles versus other people online. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, just because at this point it's taking the Union a little while to get into position against me. So I'm just going to pick the recording up a little bit down the line here once the Union is getting closer to my positions and the actual fighting has begun. A quick summary: I've got one regiment across this little stream here, which is going to kind of act as a buffer. The rest of my main force is back towards St. James Church, a couple hundred yards, where my artillery is positioned. I've got a large brigade, Hampton's brigade, out to the right of the artillery battery, and I've got Jones's brigade out to the left, although you can't see that on the screen right now. You can see the Union is getting into position against me. And like I said, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit until we have a little bit more to talk about than just the Union troopers kind of getting into position against me. Alright, so as we see, the Union cavalry is starting to come out of the woods here. They've also got a regiment of infantry there, you can see. As we move forward here, we see on the left side of the screen the actual Confederate right. We've got a brigade of infantry, then we've got our artillery up here along near the St. James Church with a little bit of cavalry in reserve, and then off to the left, or since we got turned around there a little bit, on the Confederate left, we've got another brigade of infantry here. So the Union is coming out here. They're starting to form up. You can see here's my regiment that I've got across the creek, kind of in an attempt to slow them down. Obviously they're going to go around me to a certain extent. That infantry regiment looks like it's crossing the stream over here, but they are going to have to deal with this regiment here of mine unless they want to leave their flank and rear open, which I'd be fine if they want to do that here. But it is a 350-man Regiment Cobb's Georgia Cavalry Legion. So here we've got kind of a close-up of them as the Union is advancing. We're right along the water's edge. Obviously heavily outnumbered, but I'm kind of using them as just as a buffer, as a way to slow the Union down, or at least part of the Union down. My thinking is if I can delay a couple Union regiments, that might give me some time to delete the rest of the Union force in detail if they continue advancing. And if they stop, well, then it buys me more time, because this objective is a defensive objective here. So if I can hold the objective long enough, then I earn those points. You earn points when you hold an objective point. Every, each scenario is a little bit different. Sometimes, you have to hold it for a minute. Sometimes you have to hold it for 5. But basically, you earn points the longer you hold the objective, and that kind of helps determine who wins. So we see my men have dismounted, and they're now engaging the Union regiment to their front. It's quite a sizable, large regiment. There's another regiment off to their right. But I'm going to go ahead and mount up this cavalry and order them to charge into the face of these troops. Kind of keeping in line with what happened at Brandy Station, and that there were a lot of cavalry charges back and forth. Further, if the Union doesn't mount up, I should have an advantage charging into dismounted infantry. And there you see the Union has started to retreat as my men charge into them, so that's going to give me quite a bonus there. Obviously they're not shooting back at me. Looks like I intercepted a courier for Colonel Devon, ordering the Union to attack, but I kind of already knew that. So as my cavalry charges down those Union troopers who are running instead of riding, the Union has continued to advance. So it's a pretty sizable Union regiment that I've just driven back here with relatively low loss. You can see my score on the lower left is going up pretty quick. Basically every enemy you kill, you get points, and every time you lose a man you get points. So I've had 25 casualties. I've inflicted well more than double, triple that on the Union regiment that was in front of me, so that's a good start to the battle. I've got 2 regiments here off to my left, the Union right, that I can now advance. You see the Union troops are kind of advancing headlong into my artillery batteries. I'm moving around a bit, it might be kind of hard to follow. But if I was to rotate the screen to the right here, I've got some artillery batteries at the St. James Church, and I've got 2 Confederate artillery or Confederate cavalry regiments off to the left. So if the Union keeps advancing the way they are, then I can kind of advance into their flank. Otherwise they'll have to turn to meet me, and again that will buy me more time. Still riding down the Union. Haven't lost any more men, it looks like. So kind of interesting. It seems I drove back the regiment, but the rest of the Union has... Oh, never mind. I was going to say they've ignored me, but I have pulled off a couple, look like 2 cavalry regiments from their main advance across the river, who are now coming back to deal with my regiment, which is a bit risky because now I'm kind of caught between 2 Union forces. So the charge, while beneficial and certainly helping in pulling 3 regiments off the line, is quite dangerous for me. Hopefully maybe I can ride out of here this way, if I can mount up in a column and kind of get them out of there on the double here before the Union can do much. Either way, it's bought me time, inflicted significant casualties and bought me time for the rest of my forces out there to hold their positions. So in that sense it was very it was useful either way, even if this regiment is routed and driven back. But looks like there is an escape route here, so that's kind of one way. I'm getting a little bit dizzy with all the spinning here, but that is one way that cavalry is very, very different than infantry in the Civil War era. As you can get in and get out of combat quick. They're almost like mobile infantry. You kind of think today, there's a reason that the air cavalry in Vietnam, well, not today, but 40 years ago, was referred to as the air cavalry. Get in and get out of fights quickly. Kind of what that regiment over there of mine is showing. They got in, they struck the enemy quickly, they drove back a regiment, and then now they're getting out quickly before the enemy can respond. But here the Union is continuing to advance. So now I've got some troopers that are... I've got one pinning them to the front and one that I'm trying to get along the flank here I'll probably charge them into the flank. This is a dismount. Well, actually, no, this is a infantry regiment that I'm going to be charging here. So I don't know how many charges there were during the Civil War between cavalry riding down infantry. Union troops and Confederate troops really didn't know how to form square, and the Europeans kind of looked down on them as amateurs because of it. But anyway, here's a case where I'm charging some Union infantry with my cavalry, and we'll see what happens there. They've got another regiment that's advancing that way. So the Union really is pretty disorganized. They've got another brigade coming in over there through the woods, but my regiment looks like it made it out safe. So the Union had advanced with four regiments, all pretty strong. I drove back one cavalry regiment. I just caused that infantry regiment to surrender, and then they've got one more infantry regiment which is kind of advancing on its own now against my entire line. So done a very good job so far here in disrupting the Union attack, and at least the initial Union attack has really been pretty thoroughly driven back without much difficulty here. Now this Union regiment is trying to get across the stream, but now they've got to react to my cavalry regiment coming in from their flank. But now, seeing as they have to rotate to meet my charge, they're also exposing their flank to my artillery batteries at the St. James Church. So pretty, it's working out pretty well for me here as I charge into them. But they're fresh Union troops now crossing the creek here. Looks like 2 more regiments. My 11th Virginia, which launched that successful charge at the start of the battle, is still doing alright. I'm surprised they're not exhausted. Oh. Well, the Union infantry regiment held firm. It looks like they're a little bit disorganized, but they did drive back that cavalry regiment of mine. So let's see here. I could try and charge into them again. I doubt they'd hold from another charge, but I don't know. Let's see. Okay, so looks like I've got most of Hampton's brigade still off here on the right that's not engaged, and it looks like, oh wait a minute, Union cavalry is charging up my center toward these guns here, which is near the St. James Church. This is pretty bad. We gotta get some troops in there to stop them. I think they're moving too quick though. Hurry. Well, the Union are definitely sacrificing themselves because they're getting themselves caught between 2 different regiments, but they're going right at those guns, which are particularly vulnerable to cavalry. Now, the nice thing about artillery is that artillery is much more effective against cavalry because they're such a big target. You know, you don't just have to hit the person, you hit the horse. So at range, artillery is much more effective against horsemen than it is infantrymen. So this is a very important position here for me. I've got to try and hold it, and hopefully they don't get these batteries. Now it looks like they're trying to, but I've got my horses coming in, and it's just a big confused mess. They got 1 battery. They got 1 battery for sure. Looks like they're in a melee now with my troops. The regiment of mine that was pushed back is dismounted and begun firing into Union cavalry up there further north. I've got 1 regiment here meleeing. I'm trying to bring in another, hopefully to drive them back. Yeah. Maybe I'll get them kind of cut off and surrounded, and at least I'll make them surrender. Though I'm not so sure. We'll see here. Just drove them back. Well, those guys are driven back at least. Looks like these federal infantry, they might have withstood the charge, but their organization's terrible. They're kind of slowly pulling back. Got the 11th Virginia just drove back a federal cavalry brigade, and then Cobb's Georgia Legion. They're actually the ones who won the charge at the beginning, not the 11th Virginia. I misspoke a few moments ago. So One of the guns was definitely dislodged from its position here. Union moving up this roadway still. Hopefully I can drive them back. Maybe I'll bring these cavalry forward and try and charge across the river and drive them back a bit. I want to keep these Union troops away from my guns. They're the anchor of my defensive position and what's really holding me in place here. Like I said, especially against cavalry, artillery is a very, very useful weapon. The difference is with infantry, if they're going to attack your artillery, you've at least got time while they march up to hit them with canister fire. Cavalry can get on you so quick, might only get one round of canister off. Canister being that basically turning your artillery piece into a shotgun, and it shoots dozens of small little balls. It's only effective at short range, but it is incredibly effective when used properly. And it can anchor an entire defensive position easily as long as it's not left totally unsupported. You know, you leave artillery unsupported and what's going to happen is what just happened to that one gun of mine, which got overran by cavalry. So I drove these guys back. Enemies brought up a cavalry regiment, which is bringing up to support. It looks like they're bringing some more troops here in the back. I've got three regiments, three pretty big regiments here of Hamptons that are totally unengaged. So hopefully I can take advantage of that. So far the battle's gone my way. The Unions really kind of come at me in a very sporadic and kind of haphazard manner. One regiment, another regiment. It's a very piecemeal engagement, and that definitely favors me. But my goal is to kind of keep hitting these units as they come up. The more damage I can do to them when they're split, the better off I'm going to be if they ever get a coordinated assault going. Or maybe I can prevent them from getting a coordinated assault going. Who knows? But at least for the moment, looks like the major fighting's going. These units are kind of withdrawing and fighting back and forth, but nothing too serious. I've definitely got the better of them, so I kind of attack and then they retreat, and then I attack and they retreat. Bring this regiment in here to charge. Hopefully into this regiment's flank. This is the regiment we've kind of been dealing some blows up front here as a Union infantry regiment. As I said, there were about 3,000 Union infantry at the Battle of Brandy Station, as opposed to roughly 8,000 cavalry. The Confederates had about 9,000 men, 8,500 men, all horsemen. So those guys are pulling back pretty quick. But hey, if they want to pull back, that's fine. Then their men turn their back to my horsemen's sabers and they don't shoot back, so I'm totally okay with that. I'm trying to use this water line here as a defensive, really. Defensive position anyway. Thinking maybe I should bring some of those regiments in from the flank. Doesn't seem like the enemy is going to hit me on the far right. I might as well reconsolidate my line in the middle toward the St. James Church and my artillery pieces. Looks like the enemy has at least a full brigade coming in as reserves. So, as I've already said several times, the more I can do to hurt them now, the better off I'll be later. Alright, but we're going to jump ahead just a few moments here. The enemy's kind of trying to get organized. I've got one regiment I'm kind of dueling back and forth with, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot going on right this moment. Looks like they took my objective in the rear, but I don't see any infantry. I just see a officer. Huh. Must be the regiment I drove back must have reformed over there. I'll get one regiment on that, but they should be easy to dispatch. As I said, only about one regiment really doing any trouble here. I should be able to drive them off quickly. They've got some units reforming on the horizon. Gonna bring these regiments over from Hampton back into the center to kind of reinforce my line, since it doesn't look like they're gonna try and flank me. And gonna jump ahead a few moments here just so we can kind of get a little bit further into the battle and kind of see how things develop as they prepare for their attack. Like I said, this is really more of a skirmish right now, with only one regiment kind of trading shots as these other units here kind of on the horizon start to get ready and get themselves into position. So jumping ahead a bit here, the Union has moved beyond their previous positions. They've got a regiment across this creek here, which is, as I said, going to be my main defensive line. I've got Hampton's brigade in place. A couple of regiments remaining of Jones's brigade are still on the far side of this third creek, if you will, or sorry, second creek, if you will. Now it looks like the Union mean to get around my flank with a regiment here. Although I'm not quite sure why they've pulled up short of my flank. It's almost like they've got their line in the shape of an L, kind of like an ambush situation, but really they're exposing their own flank by lining up this way. Now you can see they've got a very small regiment on their far end of their line here, but I'm going to go ahead and charge that, drive that off. Hopefully this other regiment will just be stupid and sit. Nope. Okay, they're gonna adjust here. Probably turning to meet my attack here, but it'll be too late to save this small little regiment that I'm gonna overrun. That regiment is done for without a doubt. Jeez, this looks... It might have like 2 or 3 guys survive. That's more of a company than a regiment, but now the other regiment has turned to meet my attack and is now dismounted and firing into my flank as I charge after this one. So let's see if I can halt, kind of reform. No, I don't want to charge this other regiment. I don't want to keep charging this regiment. I want to stop. Well, that was not my intent. I'm getting fired into my flank here. Here we go. I've got them reformed. That regiment only has a couple people left, but I'm charging now into these dismounted Union troopers. And if I can drive them off, then the entire wing of the Union force here, at least its flank, will be more or less crushed, as they're now definitely pulling back here. So that was a success. Let's see here, there's another regiment. Jeez. Okay, so that's why the Union wasn't attacking yet. They've still got more troops they're bringing into place, but it seems like as soon as I drive off one regiment, more regiments come up. We're going to have these guys pull back here and rest a bit. They definitely inflicted quite a blow to the Union. They only lost about 10 men themselves, but inflicted well over 5 times as many casualties. That one regiment won't be back. They've only got a few people. This regiment probably will reform, but it's at least been dealt a pretty bloody nose here. Go ahead and reform as quick as we can. It does tire the guys out to use charging and double quick a lot, but beats having your flank fired into for an exposed period of time, so not much choice there. We're moving up 2 more regiments in support. The rest of my line looks like it's pretty solid here. Of those 3 regiments of Hamptons that I brought over, the other 2 are still kind of on this crest of this slope. You can't necessarily tell it from the angle I'm at, but it is a little bit of a hill, holding these victory locations. Looks like the Union's going to try and get around the dismounted unit. I'm now firing into that regiment that I drove off for a bit. Dismounted. The enemy's bringing up another regiment here to try and get around my flank, so I'm going to call in some other troops here from Hamptons to prevent them from getting around this regiment here. Scenario feels somewhat like a chess match where I move and then they move to correspond and I move back. More so than the normal infantry engagements, probably because of the speed and mobility with which the horsemen or the cavalry moves. But hopefully these Federals tire themselves out getting across this creek. There is a movement penalty when you cross a body of water. Even as these creeks are pretty small, you can definitely tire your troops out trying to get across. So, looks like a couple of the Union regiments over here have kind of pushed forward a bit, and they're engaging some of my other troops left in Jones's brigade. So it's kind of turned into more of a general engagement with firing going on all along the line, although more dismounted firing than anything right now. But the battle has definitely turned strongly in my favor by this point, given that you do get, you know, points for holding objectives, and the fact that the Union really hasn't prevented me from holding those objectives very much. Charging into these guys dismounted. So, general rule of thumb, the enemy horsemen are dismounted. If you can charge into them while they're dismounted, you get a big advantage. They're not set up to hold. Like I said, Union troops, Confederate troops, no one learned square formation, and cavalry wasn't going to use square formation anyway, but what's going on over here? Union charge. It's kind of disorganized mess over here. I can't really tell who's retreating where. But my guys are still sort of in their positions, so it looks like we held. Meanwhile, the Union is pulling back. Now they're countercharging. Really a running fight. Meanwhile, over here on the left, things have stabilized into more of kind of a traditional shooting back and forth fight. I do have a regiment I could bring in on their flank, since I've got these regiments pinning them, maybe turning their left as I try and turn their right, and maybe get something along the lines of a double envelopment going here. But, I don't know, my regiments on one flank have been kind of neutralized. The morale isn't so good anymore. Hampton's regiments haven't held up as well as Jones's did earlier, now that the Union has their entire force more or less in play, or bringing it into play. Like I said a few moments ago, that was a key on why I was trying to hit them while they were disorganized, is to prevent them from overwhelming me now, and I think that did succeed to a point, because even though I am being pressed on both flanks, really, I'm holding pretty well. I'm not in good enough shape to really launch a full-fledged counterattack or attempt to crush the Union, but I am doing all right here. Just kind of holding the line, which is my objective here. I just want to hold these objective points as long as I can, rack up that major victory there, which definitely looks like I'm on my way to doing. Seems like by driving the Federals back on my right, their left, may have won the battle there. Like I said, there's a stand-up fight going on my far left, the Union right, but on the Union left, or my right, getting you all, hopefully I'm not getting you confused with my directions, the fighting subsided with those charges. Really short but vicious engagements back and forth here. So let's jump ahead a little bit, see if anything else manifests itself, or if maybe that was kind of the finale to this fight, more or less, as opposed to just some skirmishing on the edges. Well, that's all that appears to really have materialized. There's some skirmishing going on, some minor fighting going on, but other than that, that charge of those couple regiments on the far right definitely helped win the day. There wasn't really any point, other than maybe for a minute or two, where there was a general engagement along the entire line. So my initial kind of disrupting attacks did a good job preventing the Union from bringing anywhere near their full numbers against me, and were pretty successful here. So this should definitely be a major victory for me. And we're just kind of wrapping up here as we kind of go into the final moments of the battle. I do want to thank you for taking your time watching this video for the Wargamer.com. This is, as I said, the 6th scenario in the Brandy Station expansion. If you enjoy it, check it out on Matrix Games' site. But for Wargamer.com, this is Matthew Flanigan. As you see there, a major victory, and I'm gonna go ahead and sign out.